What about the other counterfactual question of what would have happened if Confederate States won the war?
The Confederate States had won the war. You would have seen, I think, a separate country in the South. You would have seen two countries, and that Confederate country would have been a smaller country, but it probably would have been able to defend itself because it would have actually gotten much richer than it was. It was poor at the time, but through its cotton trade and other things, it would have been recognized by Great Britain, by France, by other societies, and you would have seen a Southern Republic. I don't think you would have seen that Southern Republic dominate the continent. The Union had the men and people and had the resources, but you would have seen a rival republic to the United States in the South.
Do you think they had interest to dominate the continent, to take over the Union?
They had a foreign policy. They had a plan. Many have written about this. They had plans, many Southerners did, of expanding into the Caribbean, which was actually more feasible. They did not have the personnel to occupy so much territory going out west, if you think about the amount of land that had to be covered. But they had the nautical capabilities and naval power and the money to dominate islands in the Caribbean, and those islands were important for their trade. So there were many Southerners who wanted to take control of Cuba, wanted to take control of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and so you probably would have seen Southern warfare in those areas.
From a counterfactual history perspective, can you make the case that secession would have created a better world? Like if we were sitting today and do Back to the Future thing, the secession in this context, if we put aside the suffering and the loss of life in the war, that we would be in a better world today? Just looking at the political climate. And can you also make the case that actually this outcome of the Union winning the war is the better one?
I think the Union victory is by far the better outcome, because I think what you would have had otherwise is you would have had a slave republic in the South that would have encouraged slavery in other parts of the world, would have exported slavery, and would have necessarily been hostile to many of the positive changes that occur in the Union, the movement toward progressive reforms, creating cities with health codes and public education and many of those things. Public education really develops in the North as a way of training workers who are being paid to be better workers in a factory. Mm-hmm. There's a reason you don't educate slaves, because if you educate slaves, they'll rebel.
Yeah, so don't you think there would be a huge pressure from the North to abolish slavery anyway?
There would have, but I think the South could have survived without another war. I mean, I think the way that slavery would have ended in the South, if it didn't end with the Civil War, it would have been with another war.
I guess the deeper question is it better to work through your problems together, or is it better to get a divorce?
I think in this case, it was better to work through the problems. It's not even working through them together. It's better to work through the problems where one side has the resources to incentivize you to work through the problems rather than leaving you on your own to go your own direction. I think the argument against the Union winning would be the argument that would be made by those who believe they suffered from Union power later on. So you could argue, if you're a historian of Native Americans, if you're a historian of the Philippines, you could argue some of the areas where this newly united nation coming out of the Civil War was able to use its power to spread its influence. It would have been harder for the Union to do that if the Union had to deal with a rival to the South.